Hi, I'm Alan. This is the second steps in narration video. It's about moving on from Audacity to, in my case, Reaper. So, did you get the bug? Narration can be very pleasurable. It can expand your horizons. It can be challenging in a positive way. And it can fit in with the rest of your lifestyle. Conversely, it can be the opposite of these things. How's it been for you? If you find yourself more on the right of this slide, well, maybe that's why you're looking to re-engineer your way of working and the IT tools you use. And if you're more on the left, maybe you've just got in the groove and you're ready to take the next steps. So ask yourself, is this the time to move on? Well, I took that decision just over a year ago, and it definitely helped my working life, dramatically up my productivity, and I'm delighted with the improved quality of my audiobooks. So what's this video got in store for you? Well, it'll reassure you that there are things that you do in Audacity which are still available, like punch and roll, or to take breaths between parts of sentences and just reduce them so that they don't get in the way without making it sound unnatural, and letting you play around and see precisely what fine-tuning you want. Of course, there will be some breaths which contain the kind of artifact that even if it's very much quieter, you'll still hear. So in those cases in Audacity, we just have this punch-paste feature. And although it isn't native to Reaper, its versatility still allows you to punch-paste. But there are plenty of new areas, for example, being able to use different layouts according to the job that you're doing. And perhaps the biggest difference, that of non-destructive editing. Let's just peel this back, and underneath we can see what was there before. Or go to an item and reveal recorded material that isn't currently on display. Nothing is thrown away in Reaper. But then there will be occasions when you can't actually do an edit, whether it be Audacity or Reaper. You need a specialist tool. And Reaper's integration with other editors, for example RX, as you see here, is very, very smooth indeed. I haven't done any special editing to speed that up. That really happened that quickly. And in another editor, you can go looking for anomalies which are very difficult to remove otherwise. Here I'm using iZotope's RX to identify whether I can fix a problem and then to choose an appropriate tool to improve a challenging problem I found, and then to return the corrected audio segment to Reaper. You're able to then listen to the track before and the take after, and see that it's acceptable, and then you can hide it as well so it all looks consistent. Another thing I'm going to be looking at in this video is how you can move the jobs that you can do in Reaper to the fastest and most efficient place, and in this case using RX for batch processing, so that, for example, I can do multiple files. Nearly all of mastering jobs that I would be sitting there running one after another can now be run in a batch process while I have my supper or overnight, and that very much improves the balance of my life. I can return just to see how the batch processing worked. Did I meet all of the benchmarks that are required by ACX or whoever? The rest of this video looks at all these areas in greater detail, but it starts by looking at how my files and folders started working more efficiently for me. With better named and organized files and folders, I can find things and back them up easier, and it also supports working better both within my audio apps and when I move from application to application. Then I'll be looking at how my recording and editing has become more efficient and certainly achieves better results by leaning on the non-destructive nature of the DAW, Reaper, and the productivity increases that come from that. And of course it means I'm just doing less repetitive and boring stuff, which also means that I'm enjoying the job more. And this is also true about mastering. If you have a proven, repeatable process, you automate everything, you're going to be more efficient in revising and correcting your material, and the improved productivity means a higher proportion of your time is spent getting your work right first time round. For me, this effort of re-engineering and moving on to different tools to work with gave me a simpler workflow. I now spend significantly less time sorting problems out. I do things in a well-defined, proven way, which helps me to use automatic mastering techniques that are more efficient and reliable. And of course, there's loads of material to support us on YouTube and social media, and I hope this little video helps too. But I suppose I ought to tell you what I'm using. I suppose the obvious thing looking at these two lists is that there's a lot more software on the new setup. The orange ones, by the way, are the free or voluntary contribution products, and it's clear that my focus is on using the right tools for the right job, which means I need more tools. My starting point is improving the workflow, thinking about the process of making audiobooks, using standardization for efficiency, building on things that work, changing everything that doesn't work for you, and as you go along, documenting it all. I found this really helpful, especially as writing down what you do makes you question, is that the very best way of doing it? And I will talk a little bit about file naming conventions because they are also a help to productivity. Migrating from Audacity to RX and Reaper allowed me to redesign and standardize my filing system. All of my audiobook-related material is stored in this new folder called Audiobooks, where I keep everything relating to my audiobook production. Here I'm looking at the audiobook template. By duplicating this template, I'm able to have a standardized naming convention. In one folder, all the audio material, in the other, the project management material. For example, I put the contract in this contractual folder, and the ebook goes into this sent by rights holder folder. And I've also got this Excel spreadsheet in which I keep track of all the changes that I make as I go along. Let's have a closer look at the template's audio folder. In here, the most important of the subfolders is the chapter template, which encourages me to add a sequence number to each chapter name. To further encourage me to use standard naming conventions, I have copies of this chapter folder for opening credits, closing credits, and for the retail audio sample, and for the first 15 minutes. For each audiobook, I also keep in a separate Reaper file copies of all the character voices that I've used as I've gone along to make them quick and simple to access directly from within Reaper. I'll demonstrate to you how I use these three folders to help me use Reaper with RX and to store the resulting master files. So to recap, I've shown you standardization of folder and file naming conventions, and the next thing we need to do is look at how I start any project. And typically that means I'm looking at an audition. Okay, I'm going to set up a little audition file for us to show you how it works. I'm going to call it an audition. So I'll copy this template folder, and in the copy I'll rename that to my An Audition project. And there we are. Now, An Audition has got a number of subfolders, and the key audition one is called Audition, and in there is a generically titled Audition Reaper file. You see that abbreviated title. Now we can change that, not just here, but in all the files in this folder for An Audition. And I use some wonderful free software called Name Changer. I just need to advise it which folder contains all the folders for this audiobook. Press recursive so that everything within there is looked at. Those are on the left. You can see listed all the files that are in there. I've got a little macro called populate abbreviated title, and all I do is change abbrev title to AA for an audiobook. Everything on the left here that matches that gets changed to what you see on the right. And so you see I've done 8 files just like that, standardized. And if this then goes from audition to an offer and turns into a book, then I've got all the files set up. There's my first file to look at. That's my Reaper file for the audition. So the project is established, and now we can get on and we can build the recorded and edited part of our project. And for this, we're going to use the DAW of our choice, in my case, Reaper. And I want to show you some of the excellent things it can provide over and above what you're used to in Audacity. So now to record an audition in Reaper. Just a reminder that this video is only a demonstration of what I can currently do for you to compare with what you can already do in Audacity. It's not intended to be a training course in Reaper, RX or any other software. If you are interested in what you see here, there are plenty of resources on the web. Or if you're interested in something you see I've done that you haven't found elsewhere, post a comment below and I'll see if I can make another video to explain how that's done. For the next few minutes, the words Demo Mode appear in white over the centre of the screen. Please don't be distracted by that. Thank you. Now I've configured my Reaper desktop to look similar to my Audacity and to be clear and uncluttered. At the top there you can see the tab for the audition, and next to it that's my voice samples file. Below, where I am along the timeline, here about half a second, and next to that is the transport control section with play, pause and rewind and so forth. I've also got a small group of additional buttons, ones I prefer to use. You have a lot more control than you have in Audacity. Below that, the track with buttons like mute and solo, and a few others that I can show you a little later on. Between there and the waveform is a little meter showing you how loud you're being when you're recording the track. And this will be a raw track. There won't be any effects applied. Whereas in Audacity, you have to apply effects and they stay with the track and build up. In Reaper, that's not the case, and I'll show you that in a little while. First, I'm going to change the layout to the narration layout, which gives me room below for my words, as opposed to here, where there's room to the side for the words. I prefer this for my editing. For the moment, I'll look at my narration view, and I'll open my source Word document below it. Just get this timeline looking in the right place. And here's our words. I've just borrowed that from a recent audition. And I'll start the 3-second pre-roll now. The wild wind roared in the pitch-black darkness of the night. Lightning illuminated the black void in its ghostly light. What those flashes of light reveal fills even the most fearless hearts with fear, the mind refusing to believe what the eyes see, impossibly high mountains of water crashing into each other, erupting like volcanoes. I think that's enough. So that's the pretty basic, simple, clear layout I've opted for in my Reaper layout, and everybody has different ideas what they like to do. Now we can look at what you can do during the edit cycle. It's all underpinned by the non-destructive nature of what Reaper does. It allows us to do punch and roll easily and to make corrections around that. It allows you to create and tinker with your own set of actions, which you can fine-tune and allocate quick keys to. And then you can link it to another app that you want to do specific other editing functions in. So let's get straight away to doing some editing. Right, so now to proof and edit what we're doing. We'll start off by just reviewing through here, and I'll mark up anywhere that I think something needs to be addressed. Just play. The wild wind roared in the pitch-black darkness of the night. Lightning illuminated the black void in its ghostly light. What those flashes of light reveal fills even the most fearless hearts with fear, the mind refusing to believe what the eyes see, impossibly high mountains of water crashing into each other, erupting like volcanoes. Okay, so I've now marked up anything I think needs a revisit. You can see they're numbered there. If you like, you can even write on them what it is you want to do. And you can jump then forwards. You don't have to sort of spend ages looking for these things. There's a single key click, takes you on to the next one. So the first one here, it'll always be just to the left of where I put the marker in, because I take time to think. And this one is just a little bit rough and perhaps a bit too loud. Lightning illuminated the black void in its... Lightning illuminated... I think it would get by, except that it's a stressed word, so I might like to re-record that particular one. So using punch and roll,
Lord, in
I have
the
a 3-second
pitch-black
pre-roll,
darkness of the
and
night.
then lightning. This is not overlaying the track. I've not sort of ruined what's on the track. I've inserted another file entirely. You can see here the name of the original file ended in 2005, and this new track here ends in, let me just pull that over, ends in 1455. So they're totally different files, and I can move stuff around within this window defined by the boundaries of the white area. The white area being the item I'm currently looking at. I can change from item to item, and I can move something around within there, for example, like this. Obviously, I can shorten or lengthen an item, but I can also roll the curtain, as it were, back, so make one larger and the other one smaller at the same time, just by choosing where precisely I put my cursor down.
Illuminated the black void in its ghostly light. What those flashes of light reveal fills even the most fearless hearts with fear.
Let's find the next one. This really is just a rather loud breath. Perhaps I'll have it with some words before it.
It's with fear.
So if I turn on my repeat.
It's with fear. It's with fear.
What I really want to do is make that a little less noticeable. Single key click again. I can take down the volume just of this area here. And in fact, once I've used it, I can then manually adjust it up or down. So if I put it on repeat.
The mind refusing to believe.
Let's go in there. Sorry. That's
the mind
better.
Hearts with fear.
Let's see if that's exactly what I was looking for.
The mind refusing to believe what the eyes see. Impossibly high mountains of water crashing into each other.
So I went past the last of my
what the eyes see.
Areas to look at. There's a little click. See that little bump there? That's synonymous with the
what
click
the eyes
behind the word eyes. Again, if I just put it on to repeat, so
the eyes see. The eyes see.
Idea of that.
The eyes see.
I hope this is coming across on the recording. There's a very nasty little sound.
The eyes
click.
see.
Just
the eyes
see. Louder overall. Hopefully you heard that. So this would be quite difficult to fix in Audacity, or indeed I think it would be probably quite challenging in Reaper too. So what I would like to do is use RX to sort that particular one. And to do that, I'm going to send it across to RX. I need to do a few things. I need to turn this into 2 takes. Takes are normally turned off when you're using narration, punch and roll. But for this particular case, it'd be quite useful for me to have 2 takes. One is the one that you're seeing here, and the other one will be the repaired one by RX. So the first thing I need to do, again, single key click to make this into its own item. So I've just put in some new boundaries here, and another single key click to send it across to RX. So there we are, made 2. That happened so quick I couldn't even talk you through it. But we'll see that when we come back, what it's done to the Reaper track. This here is, I'll just play the eyes see. That's what we've sent across. The eyes see. The eyes see. And that little area there is synchronous to the click sound that we're hearing. The eyes see. The eyes see. So what I'm going to do is highlight that area and ask it if it can make it much more like the areas around it. And I think possibly a bit of both would be called for. There's a wonderful tool here called Spectral Repair, and we can say, yes, can you make it a bit more like, well, actually before and after, and let's see what it would be like. At the moment it sounds like that, rather nasty and rough. After it's been repaired,
gives me confidence I will be able to get something nice out of that. So I'm going to render this, and if we listen to this, hopefully the eyes see. The eyes see. Very pleased with that. That sounds much nicer. So all I need to do now is to save this changed file and save it. And now that has been added to the media file of all the little files that we make as we record an audition. So we go back to Reaper. This is now pointing to a different file than the one above it. So if we listen to the one above it, the eyes see, and it's self-fixed. Eyes see, the eyes see, the eyes see. Then that's very pleasing. Refusing to believe what the eyes see, the eyes see. If we don't want to bother ourselves with seeing the fact that we fixed it there, we can hide all of the previous takes, so now it all looks much the same. Refusing to believe what the eyes see. Though, to be honest with you, I don't really worry about that. So that is all of the editing, very straightforward, some of it by using another program. Once you get into the swing of it, it makes work very straightforward. And the beauty is that everything that was there before has been retained. So in the same way that we have here the previous version of that, I could go back and use that if I wanted, or modify it in another way. If we go back to the earlier correction here, you recall that we had already put this punch and roll over what was there before, but it is still there, so gives us a lot of flexibility, and you don't have to do any extra paperwork or shuffling files around in order to achieve that. So where I previously had, maybe 8 tracks representing the various FX and mastering that I was doing, I can get away with a single one in Reaper. I hope that gives you a flavour of recording, editing and checking accuracy within the Reaper DAW. The next area to look at is improving the audio quality of the narration track. Well, I'd like to turn the clock back now about 2 years to my Audacity days, just to give you a quick glance of what my desktop used to look like, and hopefully that's not that far from where you are. We've got raw tracks towards the top. The second one down has got a noise-reduced version. I commonly used noise reduction fairly early in the process. And then as you work down that page, you can see that I've added little hints as to what else I've done to that track. So that next one has normalized, and I reminded myself that was set at 3.0. There's some compression at 2:1, and so forth. And that meant that if I wanted to, I could then back up. If I needed to do a change, I knew the effect sequence that I needed to apply to get the same result so that it would match everything else. This is so much easier in the world of Reaper because, for example, I typically only work on a single track. Obviously, there are times when you'd need to do differently, but for most of my projects, it has been fine. Now, the benefit to me of moving to Reaper is that I don't have to bake all of these effects into a track every time I want to apply it. So I don't need to keep working on lots of copies to work out the history of where I need to go back to. You'll notice above each item on the Reaper track, this little heading that you can see here contains lots of useful information and functions. For example, there's a lock, a mute, a place where you can apply FX uniquely to that particular item. So if I click on it, you can see here we have a choice of different effects we can have. And although there are a very large number of them, you can filter for different kinds of category or file type. I asked for the VSTs. And right at the top there is Loudmax from Thomas Munt, a very, very useful plugin for me. Filter for this list of iZotope RX7 plugins. And the makers of Reaper, Cockos, you can filter for all the FX that ship with the product. That Reaper is the one that's particularly good for noise reduction, and there's details of how to apply that in the Reaper manual. This is what happens when you click on one of those. It comes into the list of available FX for a particular track, and then you can tune it to your requirements. You'll notice it's also glowing green to show that there has been an effect or more than one applied to that particular item. To reverse the effect, simply uncheck it, and it's much easier than having to duplicate the track and do all sorts of overheads. It also helps to be able to play around to try and get exactly what you want. Now, we talked before about applying the effect to a particular item within the track, but you can apply to the whole track simply by turning on this switch here. Let's look at doing the effects within Reaper. If you want to do it based in Reaper, you've got, for example, here we've got 6 starting with EQ, and then I've got a couple of iZotope ones from RX. That's a native one for Reaper, for the noise reduction. There's a DS, and something I used occasionally for some reflections, very, very subtle reverberation. And as you can see, they're in a particular order. You can change that around, just drag them from place to place, change the settings in the large panel on the right to whatever you want, try it out, and very, very different to the Audacity experience. Now, I had the experience that my relatively small processor couldn't cope with all of the effects that I wanted to in real time. And so the way around that is simply to turn off the effects while you're doing the raw recording, and then to apply them subsequently when you're exporting. My current process only requires the EQ settings to be done in Reaper, and everything else is done in batch format in iZotope RX itself. So now that it's time for me to export my edited proven track to iZotope RX for batch processing, I'll turn on the FX switch. It would have been off during the recording. And I also turn on the FX switch for the master. The master only has one FX, which is called the audio statistics, and that allows me to keep an eye on the calculation of the RMS value. Now, I'll just move this whole window down below there so that it doesn't clash with another window that I'm going to open up, which is the render window. In this case, we're going to render in wave format, 44.1 kilohertz, single channel, that's monophonic, and I need to tell it which folder to output the rendered file to. This is a good time to give you more information about the way that my template project folder works. I mentioned earlier I was going to explain about 3 very useful folders that are in the audio project folder. The first of these folders is 4RX, which takes the wave formatted output from Reaper, standardized at a RMS value of minus 23 decibels, which is what my settings for iZotope RX are expecting on the input file. Next, I use RX to process the input file or files from Reaper and output them to Get Second Opinion. Get Second Opinion has to have WAV files in it because Second Opinion will only work on them, not on MP3s. But since it's a good idea to have the uncompressed, best version, if you like, of the mastered files, whether or not you're working through ACX, then it's not much of a drawback. Second Opinion then reads these files in the Get Second Opinion folder and reports on them in terms of their conformance. And once they're approved, then iZotope RX, working again in batch mode, can create files in the mastered folder in the required upload format. So I need to find out how far away from the minus 23 RMS standard this narration track is. Because I've moved most of the FX processing out of Reaper, the WAV file is generated quickly, and I can consult the audio statistics data to find out how close I am to the benchmark. If you recall, the benchmarks are typically a band for RMS and peak signal and peak floor values, MP3 file encoding data such as 44.1 kilohertz, and part of the mastering is to make sure that we actually conform to those. If we think about the scale that's used, it goes negatively from 0 downwards to minus infinity as you get more and more quiet. There's a typical spoken range of loudness, And I've put in an arrow to indicate the range that I normally speak to, and you can see that the mean fits about the middle of that. The green bar indicates the range of acceptable RMS values, so you can see that mine's just a little on the quiet side. But there's also peak values to consider, which are the exceptionally loud but possibly very short signals on the recording. But you're not allowed to stray into the red band here. At the quiet end is the floor, and the brown arrow there indicates the loudness of these non-vocal or background noises. When we amplify or attenuate or normalize our data, we're simply moving all of these figures together, and that can push the peak into the red area. It can drag the peak floor out of the allowed area there, which is clearly not a good idea. So we use techniques like compression where everything is squeezed up. But again, if that sorts out the peak, it probably compromises the floor, which is, again, not a good idea. What you really need to do, of course, is this clever combination that moves the RMS in the right area, doesn't move everything else into the wrong areas. And that's a challenge you'll be aware of. So my process uses a standard value of minus 23 decibels as an RMS submission to RX. Here the value is minus 22, so it's too loud by 1 decibel. So I'll change the master fader to subtract 1 decibel, and I'll also make a note of that in this interchange file name, so that if I do have to redo the entire track, it'll be easy to do this again without having to go through that first check. Speaking of which, I think I'll remove the first output file there, the one without the -1 in the name, and that'll keep everything nice and clean. And now I need to submit this to the program iZotope RX. Here's iZotope's batch processing window. It's defaulted to the mastering preset, highlighted in blue on the left. Below, where I can drop the input file names in, are the FX modules that will be run in sequence on each of the files that are batch processed. I've got 5 here: mouth declick, voice denoise, DS, the Loudmax plugin, which is so useful in achieving those benchmark values, and finally an EQ to mop up the unwanted very high and very low frequency signal. So we can return to pick up our file that we've just sent out of Reaper and drop it onto the input file window. And we just need to tell it where to take it to. Now that's the second of our special files, the get second opinion file. So we know that the file that will come out of it will also have batch processing from RX added to the name of the file, so we can see where it's come from. And it's just this quick to say that's what it's going to be. It's going to go into get second opinion, and now this is the batch. If there was more than one file, they would run in parallel. You would see them all listed there, all going at the same time, working their way probably at different speeds. And there we are. We've processed all of that batch. Now the question is it conformant to the benchmarks? So we kick up the second opinion program from Stephen J. Cohen. And the one thing it wants to know is what's the folder that it's going to find these files in. So we're going to give it the name of that. There we are. That's our get second opinion folder. And it goes in and it only finds one, tells us it found one file, and then it gives us the statistics. If you recall from our little earlier discussion, there are a number of values we have to meet, and 5 of them are easily picked off here. I've color-coded them so you can see them all, except for the constant bit rate, which hopefully you won't have to change anyway. The program also reports on the length of silence at the head and the tail of the file, which again are reasons why your file might get rejected. Once you've checked that the files do meet the required benchmarks, then there's a second preset to output the MP3 files, again for the batch. So we go back and find this time the folder that our file is waiting in. Well, it's in Get Second Opinion at the moment. So we'll just take the contents of Get Second Opinion and move that to mastered, and then just take the WAV file and submit it to this batch. When I first set up Reaper, I actually sent the file across to Audacity to do the MP3 conversion and run the ACX check. But having experimented, there's very little difference over here, and it's a lot more straightforward to do it in iZotope RX. And you see it's a very straightforward process. And if we go and look back in the folder, we now see that the MP3 file has been added there. And we can use RX to give us an idea how different the MP3 file is from the WAV file statistics. So I'll drag it onto the background here within RX. And if I select the statistics module, we can see that the peak level is shown here as sample peak level is lower than -3 decibels, which is good. And also the total RMS level is -20, which is also between -18 and -23. On the right, I've shown you part of the second opinion report, and those numbers are just about 1/4 of a decibel higher than those reported here. And on my previous graphic, that would be about that. There's very, very little movement on that scale. So you can see how there isn't enough difference in that to warrant doing all that effort of sending it back to Audacity. My last task is a little bit of housekeeping. It's my practice to keep a separate folder of all the MP3 files which have been uploaded, so that in case there's a problem with ACX, then I know precisely where to get the latest copy of these. Well, that completes my second steps in narration view, having improved audio quality and automated much of the conformance to the submission benchmarks. So what do we use? Well, typically Finder, on Windows that would be Explorer, for the project start activities, then Reaper with RX to do the recording, editing and proof checking stage, Reaper RX and LoudMax plugin to apply the FX modules, typically using the batch processing, and then adding second opinion to RX to check the conformance. And finally, I'd just like to say a really, really big thank you to the very many people involved in the area of narration and audio wizardry, including Karen Commins, compiler of the Narrator's Roadmap, Don Barnes with his Red Barnes Audio, so many instructive and helpful videos, James Romick for social media advocacy of Reaper, Mike Del Gaudio, Booth Junkie videos on how to do all sorts of things in Reaper, Jim Edgar, such a supportive and charming audio engineering coach, Stephen J. Cohen, who wrote Second Opinion and has also got some excellent download instructions on Reaper setup, Thomas Munt, who wrote LoudMax, and finally Julia Norton, who kept my voice going this year.